We've already got the Marsala sauce started. We're going to catch you up. We didn't want to waste too much time showing you some of the basics. We got our rondeau very, very hot. We took all the beef scraps. It calls for 8 quarts of diced beef scraps. In the oil, we caramelized those until they were a deep, dark, heavy brown. Get a lot of sweetness and a lot of color into the sauce. Once you go ahead and add the onions, a lot of moisture is going to start to come out. You can see on the bottom of the pot, there's a lot of caramelization that happened. The moisture from those onions is starting to release all of that fond from the bottom of the rondeau. So we got to cook all the moisture out of the onions, but developing a good level of sweetness and color and flavor by heavily caramelizing the beef tips in the rondeau. This also works great if you can do it in a tilt skillet, because you'll get a much more even, consistent heat, and it will brown much faster. In the pot next to it, we're making the base for our olive oil and garlic sauce. We start off with our 75-25 oil, 5 pounds of sliced garlic. We're going to cook this just until the garlic starts to take on a golden blonde color. We'll add the fresh thyme, the bay leaves, a little bit of white wine. The white wine will actually deglaze the pan and stop the garlic from browning any further. So we're going to go ahead and cook this until I see the brownness. You can see it's just starting to take a little bit of color on here. The white wine will act as our stop for that, and then we'll finish it with the extra virgin olive oil, salt, and pepper. So we'll come back to these in just a minute. Just wanted to give you a little head start as to what we've got going here on the stove. We'll show you how to finish these 2 sauces in just a minute. Okay, our olive oil and garlic sauce that we talked about, we have 1.5 gallons of 75-25, 5 pounds of sliced garlic. The garlic is starting to get the brown color that I'm looking for on it. As we hold this for service, it's going to tend to cook and brown a little bit more. So as soon as I see some nice golden color on the garlic, I'm going to continue to stir it to make sure it's browning evenly and not sticking to the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and add salt, pepper, fresh thyme, and bay leaves. And then the stopgap here is going to be the white wine. But you have to be very careful pouring white wine into this hot oil. So as I get this to just what I consider to be the perfect golden brown color, I'm going to turn the heat off, and very slowly I'll start to add the white wine a little bit at a time. And it's going to start to volcano on you a little bit, so you have to be careful. I do like to cook it for just about 2 minutes longer, just to boil a little bit of the alcohol out of the wine. We store this in a 6-pan or a 3rd pan on the line, but you can see that when you go to ladle into it, you don't get any garlic. Until you actually reach down to the bottom, that's where all the garlic is. So you have to be in a habit to constantly stir this, so that when you're going to plate up your side pasta with olive oil and garlic, it needs to be stirred so you get a nice even amount of oil and garlic. We'll take our 3 liters of extra virgin olive oil, pour this into the sauce. It'll help finish it, cool it down. We will have to rapid cool this. I just like to put an ice stick in it inside of a 5-gallon bucket. That'll help cool it down in the walk-in, and we'll have it labeled and dated for later use. To the Marsala sauce, all the fat is being cooked out of the meat, but you can see the onions are fully caramelized and tender. Along with the small amount of oil that I started with, all that fat from the beef is going to help make a wonderful roux inside of this and provide good flavor. So I want to make sure I stir all this flour in. And again, I need to cook this roux for at least 5 minutes before I can go ahead and add the wine and start deglazing the pan. It's going to be a nice amount of fond developed in the bottom of the pan. Let this roux cook together. Make sure all the flour's been incorporated. We're going to let this cook for about 5 minutes before I start adding my Marsala. And then I'll cook that down until it has reduced by about half. We've let the flour and the roux cook in our Marsala sauce for about 5 minutes. I have here a reduction of 2 bottles of port wine. The 2 bottles of port wine we reduced down by about 80%. And then I had 8 bottles of Marsala wine. So I'm going to go ahead and add this mixture. And I'm going to do the same thing that I was doing with the bechamel. The roux is going to start to thicken this mixture. It's going to start to get very thick and pasty. But the alcohol in that Marsala wine is going to boil out. You can see all this moisture and all this steam. Basically what that is already the alcohol starting to boil out of the Marsala. So what I'm going to do is turn this down to a nice gentle simmer. We'll let that cook out until it forms a nice sticky paste. And then we'll go ahead and add our stock and finish the Marsala sauce. Back to the Marsala sauce. This has been simmering for about 5 to 8 minutes. I can see it's starting to get a little bit sticky now. Cooking the alcohol out of that Marsala. But that roux has taken full effect, so it's getting quite thick and quite pasty. Now is the time to go ahead and add my stock. A little bit easier to use a whisk to make sure that there won't be any lumps. I'm scraping the bottom to get all that fond off the bottom of the pot so that we can get all that flavor and color captured into our sauce. I can feel the bottom of the pot feels nice and smooth, meaning all that has already been removed and lifted from the bottom of the pan. We're going to let this come to the simmer, and again, that roux needs to simmer for a minimum of 20 to 25 minutes to cook the alcohol, not only out of the Marsala, but the most important thing is once that roux is cooking, it takes about 20-25 minutes for the starches to gelatinize and get rid of that raw, pasty flavor. Bay leaves, fresh thyme, salt, black peppercorns. I think there's been some confusion in the recipe that when you're reading it, that you're adding black pepper, not black peppercorns, and the sauce is coming out very peppery and very spicy. Black peppercorns. Coming back to our Marsala sauce, again, we had the roux mixture with the Marsala. We cooked that Marsala down until that became very thick and sticky, trying to cook the alcohol out of that Marsala. We added the reduced port, our veal stock, brought this to the simmer. Now that it's at the simmer, we're going to let it go for about 20 to 25 minutes. I'm going to add my pre-measured beef base, the bay leaves, the thyme, the peppercorns. Everything else has been added to this. Cook the starch out of the roux, then we'll come back and strain it. Now that the Marsala sauce has simmered for about 25 minutes, you can see we have a nice, beautiful emulsified sauce here. There's no fat floating on the top. Everything's been incorporated together. But I do have these large chunks of meat and herbs and onions. This is not a sauce that we puree. We're just going to go ahead and pass it through our chinois. So I'm going to take small amounts at a time into my chinois. And using a ladle, I can get the sauce to go through rather quickly. Doesn't quite go through as quickly as the Mornay, but just working in small little batches, you can get pretty good progress here. Just empty out your chinois frequently because it gets clogged very quickly. As you can see, that all that extra flavor that comes out of here, this is the most important part of the sauce right here, is the straining process. Because if you stop at this point, yeah, it looks like it's pretty much done. But as you keep working the meat, you're going to get the real rich, intense flavors in the sauce coming out of this part. So work this down until it's completely dry. No more liquids coming out of the bottom. Then you can go ahead and discard this and then start over.